All right, so welcome to another deep dive. And today we're tackling a case that I gotta say, it's pretty darn creepy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're going all the way back to the summer of 73,
Okay.
Broward County, Florida. We're talking about the Gold Sock Killer.
Hmm. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, this is an unidentified serial killer, and they left behind
I had a calling card.
a calling card. You got it. And it's as strange as it is chilling, right? We're talking about socks.
Socks.
Socks, sometimes gold socks used as murder weapons.
Okay, you definitely got my attention now.
Yeah.
This is definitely one of those cases that just gets under your skin.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And we've got some excerpts here from the Wikipedia page on the Gold Sock Killer, and we're going to
Dive in.
dive right in. Yeah.
All right, let's do it. You know, what I find so unsettling about this whole thing is it doesn't actually start with a murder.
Right.
It starts with this really terrifying attack.
Okay.
You've got this woman, she's entering her apartment, and out of nowhere, someone tries to strangle her
Oh, wow.
with a sock.
With a sock.
A sock, yeah.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. She fought back.
Oh, good for her.
Oh, yeah, with everything she had. I mean, the struggle, the noise. It must really spook the attacker because he just took off.
It's amazing how some people just have that instinct to fight, right?
It's incredible, that survival instinct.
Absolutely. But sadly, this wasn't the only attack. Just 10 days later, we have our first victim, Janina Gudjonsdottir Kelpian.
This is where things start to get really strange, really unsettling.
Yeah.
I mean, Kelpian was found beaten, strangled with a gold sock, but her body wasn't in her car where she was last seen. It was moved like a mile away from her home.
That is really creepy.
Yeah.
Like, why move the body? It almost feels personal, you know? And then there's the fact that her purse is missing, but her dog is found safe in the car. Like, what?
It's these little inconsistencies that just make this case so perplexing, so hard to wrap your head around.
Right. Like, was the killer trying to throw off the police? Or
Yeah.
was it something else entirely?
And then you have this other strange thing.
Oh.
30 minutes after Kelpian was last seen at a convenience store, right?
Right.
A man walks in
Uh-huh.
and tells the clerk that he's being questioned by the police
Yeah.
about a woman's murder.
Talk about a weird coincidence. Or was it?
Right. Was he involved, or was he just trying to, like, insert himself into the story?
Oh, that's a good point. It's like, did he want attention?
Exactly.
Or was he trying to misdirect the investigation? It really makes you think about what the police were up against, especially back in 1973.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. No DNA testing.
Right?
Limited forensic technology,
Yeah.
you know? What did they have to work with?
Shoe prints, maybe fingerprints?
Yeah, fiber analysis.
It must have been incredibly difficult. In Broward County back then, that was a different world.
Oh, yeah, you had, like, this mix of coastal development, suburbs, more rural areas.
Yeah, it must have been really hard to track anyone's movements.
Oh, yeah, it was like a patchwork of different environments.
So we have this very unsettling first murder, and then on August 8th, another victim's discovered. 17-year-old Teresa Ann Williams.
And this is where I think you see this escalation in the level of violence. And that element of premeditation becomes even more apparent. I mean, Williams's body was found in this really remote, marshy area,
Okay.
accessible only by foot.
Wow.
This wasn't just like a random dumping ground. This was a carefully chosen location.
So this was planned.
Yeah, I mean, this was planned out.
And to make it even creepier, her car was found with a flat tire and her cat was trapped inside. Like, was that a coincidence? Or did the killer do that on purpose to isolate her?
It's a chilling thought, right?
Absolutely. It's like he was making sure she couldn't escape, couldn't call for help.
Yeah. And then just 2 days later, we have our third victim, Margaret Curtis.
And this time, the victim is found submerged in the Intracoastal Waterway, weighed down with concrete blocks and, you guessed it, a black sock around her neck. The brutality is
It's escalating.
it's terrifying.
And that detail about the concrete blocks, like, it's not just about weighing the body down. It's about making sure it stayed hidden.
Concealment. He was getting better at covering his tracks.
That's a good point.
Curtis was only gone from her parents' apartment for 30 minutes. She told her friend she was going back upstairs, and then she just vanished.
It's like she was snatched right out of her life.
It's scary how quickly it all happened. And then there's the question of the socks themselves, right? Why different colors?
Right. Why not just stick with gold?
Right. Was it random? Was he trying to send a message? And how did he manage to get these women alone in such different locations?
It's like he was able to blend in, move unseen through this whole tapestry of Broward County.
Like a ghost.
Exactly. And that's what makes him so elusive, so terrifying.
It really is one of those cases that just sticks with you. So we have these 3 murders. Each one is so different. And each one has those really creepy details. But what about the police, right? Were they able to, like, find anything that connected these cases? Any leads that pointed to the killer?
Well, the investigation was huge. They questioned like hundreds of people. Yeah, they set up surveillance operations. They even gave lie detector tests. But you got to try to picture trying to solve this case without the stuff we have today.
Right, like no DNA.
Exactly. DNA analysis wasn't even a thing back then.
So what did they have?
They were stuck with fingerprints and footprints and fiber analysis. Just hoping for a lucky break, really.
That must have been incredibly frustrating for the investigators. Like, what were some of the biggest roadblocks they hit?
Well, one of the toughest things was there wasn't really a clear motive.
Oh, right. Like, it wasn't robbery?
Nope, no robbery, no signs of sexual assault in any of these murders.
Hmm.
So it made it really hard to figure out a pattern, to see what this guy was all about. And without that, it's like trying to find a specific grain of sand on the beach.
And then there's that whole thing with the socks. Different colors, different pairs. I mean, what does that tell us about the killer?
Right. It's a good question. Was it intentional? Was this guy, like, messing with the police? Or was he just grabbing whatever socks were around? Unfortunately, the Wikipedia page doesn't say anything about what the forensic guys found. So we can only guess.
Well, I guess that's part of the fun of these deep dives, right? Trying to figure it all out. I mean, are we talking about one really organized killer who just happened to be messy with the socks? Or were there multiple people involved?
It's possible. And it probably kept the investigators up at night wondering if they were looking for one person or a whole group. It definitely makes this thing even more complicated.
So did they ever actually find a suspect?
There was one guy that really stood out. In February of '74, so almost a year after the last gold sock victim, a woman was strangled with a scarf in Broward County.
Okay, so similar but not the same. No sock.
Right, exactly. But the investigators thought there were enough things in common with the gold sock murders to consider this guy a serious suspect.
So what were those things in common?
The source material didn't really say.
Ah, come on. That's so frustrating. You think those details would be, like, super important to understanding everything. So they had a suspect, but they never charged him with the gold sock murders. What happened?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? Did they just not have enough evidence to tie him to the other cases? Were there legal issues that stopped them from going after him? We just don't know.
So it's like they hit a dead end after finally finding something interesting. But this whole case is kind of like that, isn't it? Just dead ends and questions. It's like this killer just disappeared.
That's what makes this whole thing so captivating. Even after all these years, I mean, we're still left with the same questions that the police had back in '73.
Like, why the different socks? Was it symbolic or just random? And what about those flat tires on Teresa Ann Williams' car? Did that mean something? And then there's that guy who strangled the woman with the scarf. Was he really connected, or is he just a distraction?
It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
All these questions, they just hang there. They make you try to find a connection to try to make sense of something that doesn't make any sense.
And at the end of the day, this case is still unsolved. They never caught the gold sock killer, never brought him to justice.
You got it. The case just went cold, and it left everyone with a bunch of questions and a community that's forever marked by these really awful crimes.
It's a pretty scary thought that this guy, this killer, was never caught, that these victims never got justice. It makes you wonder, like, what can we take away from all of this? What can we learn from this deep dive?
Yeah, it really shows that even when you have a huge investigation, some cases are just going to stay mysteries.
Right.
And it shows you what the investigators had to deal with back then.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine if they had DNA testing back then?
Oh my gosh, it would be a totally different story.
Right. I mean, those socks could have been, like, full of DNA evidence.
Yeah.
And those flat tires, maybe there were fingerprints on the car, little pieces of evidence that could have cracked the case.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing what they can do with forensics these days. It makes you wonder if they could go back and solve this thing even now. I mean, they're solving cold cases all the time, right?
Yeah, exactly. Technology is always getting better, so there's always that little bit of hope.
Yeah, like maybe someday these families will finally get some answers. But I think this case also reminds us that these aren't just stories in the news.
Oh, absolutely.
These were real people.
Real people with families, friends.
Exactly. And their lives were cut way too short. Jonina, Teresa Ann, Margaret, we can't forget that.
It's so important to remember that human side of these cases, all the pain that these crimes caused.
And, maybe, just maybe, someone out there listening right now remembers something. Something small that they've held on to all these years, something that could help.
Right. Even something that seems unimportant could be the piece that the police are missing.
Exactly. So if anything from this deep dive jogged your memory, even a tiny detail, please call the authorities. You could be the key to solving this whole thing.
Absolutely. Don't hesitate to reach out.
You know, this whole case, with all the twists and turns and the questions that are still unanswered, it's a pretty chilling reminder that bad things can happen anywhere.
Yeah, you never really know.
But it also shows us how important it is to never give up, to never lose hope that justice will win out, even after all this time.
And it makes you think about how important it is to pay attention, to look out for each other, to be careful.
Well, I think it's safe to say that this deep dive into the Gold Site killer case has given us all a lot to think about. The
Yeah.
victims, the investigation, those questions. It's definitely a story that sticks with you.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Just goes to show that the search for the truth, for justice, it never really ends. And sometimes that search takes you to some pretty strange places.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to wrap things up for today. So, to everyone listening, keep digging into this case if you're interested. Do some research on Broward County back in the 70s. Think about how all that fancy forensic technology could help us solve this mystery. Until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and never stop asking questions.